Dogworks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dogworks. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com.
Start your day tomorrow with The Daily Dog with Michelle Forto, the morning podcast on Dogworks Radio. Apple Podcast reviewer Patty Christensen calls it funny, smart, and filled with all the info I want to know about dogs. I love this show. Wake up with The Daily Dog. Available on Dogworks Radio on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your shows.
Hi, this is Alex Stein, co-host of Mushing Radio on Dogworks Radio. We just completed our first storytelling season on the 1925 Serum Run. Almost 100 years later, the 1925 Serum Run is something that is still inspirational, amazing, and in many ways larger than life. We've gathered all of these episodes together on one page to make it easier for you to listen to them in order. Just go to dogworksradio.com/serumrun. That's SERUMRUN, no space, dogworksradio.com/serumrun. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to Dogworks Radio at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever it is that you go to listen to podcasts.
Radio Free Palmer 89.5 KVRF presents Mushing Radio, hosted by Robert Forto. Mushing Radio is about dog-powered sports, living in the Great White North, and mushing. Visit our website at mushingradio.com. Here is your host, Robert Forto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert Forto and you're listening to our daily coverage of the 2018 Iditarod here on Mushing Radio. You can hear us over on KVRF 89.7 in the Matsu Valley up here in Alaska. You can also find us over on dogworksradio.com and anywhere you find your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and more. Just search for Dogworks Radio. And make sure you check us out over on social media by going to Dogworks Radio on any of those sites. And joining us, I believe, from the side of the road in Los Angeles is Alex Stein. Alex, how's it going?
It's going great, Robert. As you were saying just before we went on the air, the lengths we go to bring this podcast. So here we are. I am thousands of miles away, but we are connected. And through the miracle of, modern internet, we have all sorts of stuff for you guys tonight. And it's shaping up to be a very exciting, very interesting, and I think relatively fast race.
Yeah, we are at the halfway point. I know we're going to jump in and talk about that in just a little bit. But before we do, what are the current standings? We are at about 5 o'clock p.m. on March 8th, local time. Where are people at on the trail right now?
So the head of the pack right now is at Iditarod. Your Ulsum was the first one to get into Iditarod, so he wins the 3,000 gold pieces, followed by Lars Monson, then Nick Pettit, Mitch Seavey, Jeff King, Larry Dortree, Aaron Burmeister, Ray Reddington Jr., Jesse Royer, and Ali Zirkle. Now, as I have to point out that this is a little bit deceptive because Yor and Lars, for example, have not taken their 24-hour rest yet. But a bunch of people who are already in Iditarod or approaching Iditarod have taken their 24-hour rest. So Nick and Mitch Seavey have taken theirs. Jeff King, who just got into Iditarod a little while ago, has not taken his. But then people on the road from Ophir to Iditarod, including Aaron Burmeister, Ray Reddington Jr., Jesse Royer, and Ali Zirkle, have all taken their 24s. So what we are going to see is most likely Yor will be taking his 24 in Iditarod, and I think we can expect this to become a real strong race at the front of the pack between people like Mitch Seavey and Nick Pettit.
Right, and as you mentioned, Yor Ulsum taking the halfway award, the $3,000, and I believe it is in gold nuggets. And it's interesting because Iditarod is on the southern route. They haven't ran the southern route in a while, And am I correct to mention that nobody lives here during the year? It is a pretty much an abandoned old gold mining town. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I think the official population is either 0 or like 1. So pretty much nobody lives there. When the Iditarod comes through, they fly in people to man the checkpoint, race officials, referees, vets and vet techs, and people to kind of take care of the mushers when they're in the checkpoint. But it is remote. It is a very far away place.
It is. And we talked a lot about the different checkpoints and their amenities and what they have to offer a little bit further back on the trail. We talked about the Takatna pies and, the steak dinners and things at McGrath and all of the hospitality that comes from there. And I know you mentioned last night about the kids at the local school and Nikolai really come together and meet the mushers and that so on and so forth. But here at Iditarod, there's not much in the way of amenities, and when you think about taking your 24-hour break, most of the time you're trying to do it to really stack up on fuel, which is of course eating good food, and then stack up on rest, because most of these folks will not sleep much between here and Nome, so it's a nice place to lay down and take a breather. I guess from a strategic standpoint, if you are staying in a relatively small checkpoint like Iditarod, there's not a lot of folks that are going to be stopping there with you, so there won't be a lot of fuss, so to speak, in a checkpoint like this. What are your thoughts on sort of that strategy of stopping here versus a little bit further back in the trail?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head in that people generally don't stop in places like Iditarod for very long. So if you're looking to avoid being in the middle of a bunch of people, for example, if you just want your alone time, or if your dogs will do better, when they are not around several dozen or several hundred other dogs, then that can be a really good thing. It also, it keeps you out of the, I want to say, musher gossip pool. Because if you're taking your 24 in a place where a lot of other people are taking their 24s, then people tell stories, and you're bound to get some information about someone's dogs or how someone has run a certain part of the trail. And if you have something that you don't want people to know about, for example, if one of your dogs maybe is underperforming a little bit and needs a little bit of extra rest, that might be something you don't want everyone to know about. And similarly, if you were having some problems, you might not want anyone to know about that. There was a story last night about Rob Cook, who had some sort of stomach bug, and he said that he, on the way into, I believe it was Nikolai, had vomited multiple times and then had diarrhea when he got into the checkpoint, and he was kind of laying low and taking his time and hoping that would work itself out. And we hear about that sort of thing a lot with some of the dogs, and sometimes when that happens to some of the dogs, they have to get dropped. It's not necessarily the thing that we hear about a lot with mushers, but if you were, that's an extreme case. But if you were maybe had pulled a muscle and you didn't want people to know about it because they might be able to use that to their advantage, maybe you would want to hide out in a checkpoint where there just wasn't a lot of traffic.
Right. One other thing about the little community of Iditarod, I'm reading this from Iditarod.com, and it says that back in the day, this place was just laden with gold. And between 1908 and 1925, about $35 million in gold was taken from the area, and at that time gold was only worth about $20 an ounce, and I know it's well over $1,000 an ounce now. I have no idea what the exact number, but this was a bustling little place back at the turn of the century, and about the time when the Serum Run was happening. I know we just hosted that Serum Run series on Mushing Radio towards the end of the year. I had no idea this much gold was found right around this area of the state.
Yeah, and I'm told that there are still like a lot of abandoned buildings from the era. Most of them are falling down or have fallen down, but a lot of there's a lot of sort of decaying infrastructure in Iditarod, and yet nobody lives there.
Right. A couple of other stories, and I know you're on the road. You're usually the story gatherer, but I just came across a couple of quick stories before we went on air. Excuse me. The first one is about security cameras that they have put up in some of the checkpoints. I know we talked about this quite a bit during the off season, and I guess a lot of the mushers noticed them in Takatna, and one musher in particular, is his name Mats Peterson? I believe it is, from Sweden. He saw them and thought that they were absolutely unnecessary. Can you comment a little bit on that, and then we'll jump into our other story?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot in the off season about security, how hard it is to have security, and when mushers put their drop bags together, their bags that are sent to each of the checkpoints. In the past, these bags have pretty much been left outside because it's cold enough that will keep everything, from spoiling, that needs to be kept from spoiling. But they've sort of been out in the open, and especially in some of these remote villages, there is not always somebody who is watching these drop bags, and so having, I certainly don't think it's the be all and end all, but definitely with the allegations that there may have been some tampering with Dalasidi's drop bags, and perhaps that's how his dogs got the positive test for the prohibited substance. I certainly think that this is a good first step to take. And I didn't read that article, but I saw the picture, and it looked like it was just basically a camera or a couple of cameras that were mounted, I guess, near where the drop bags are, so that they would have a clear view of it, and maybe a Wi-Fi connection so that the footage could continuously be monitored.
My thoughts on it, first off, if it is a Wi-Fi connected camera, I guess that would be nearly impossible to do at every checkpoint. Just think about, a place like Iditarod. I don't know if they've, some type of satellite link or something using the local internet provider up here at GCI, or what they have in some of these more remote villages. But I wonder if it, does its job if they are at these bigger checkpoints like Takatna and McGrath and Unicolete and these types of places that do have the technology that can support them, and it's purely for a security reason, and aside from that, tampering with the bags. Wouldn't you think that all of them would need that same coverage versus just the bigger checkpoints? I mean, it's just as easy to tamper with a bag in a larger checkpoint as it would be in a much smaller one, maybe even easier if there's a lot less people around. I just don't know if it fulfills its purpose. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that they would really have to have that at pretty much every checkpoint in order for it to be effective. My understanding is that before the race, a couple weeks before the race, GCI goes out and they put Wi-Fi connections that are not already in place in all of the checkpoints, so that at the very least the race officials will be able to, and whatever media is around, will be able to have some kind of access to wireless communications. But I need to remind people that this is literally, this is not like being in the middle of New York or Los Angeles or even Anchorage, where it is relatively easy to get a Wi-Fi connection or to get an internet connection. This is literally, in some cases, hundreds of miles from the nearest city, even the nearest small city. So that type of infrastructure has to be put in. And I'm not even sure exactly what that is, whether it's some sort of satellite uplink or something else. So yeah, it seems like, once again, these are good efforts. It's a good start, but it's certainly not enough, and more has to be done, and really I think the ITC needs to take a hard look at how to do this in an effective way.
And Alex, you had mentioned the speed of the internet, and even sitting here in my home in Willow, we have relatively slow internet compared to the rest of the country. It takes forever to download something from Netflix and be able to stream things and the like. I can only imagine what it's like at some of these more remote checkpoints. And a little bit of a parallel here. You're sitting in your car there in one of the largest cities in the United States, and I'm sure that there is super fast Wi-Fi and internet access all around you. I imagine if you popped open your phone and clicked over that Wi-Fi button, you'd probably see, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 Wi-Fi places that you could log on to. And it's interesting because there you are in one of those huge cities, and talking to me on Skype right now, you're still fading in and out a little bit because of the poor Wi-Fi signal. I just find that is an interesting parallel from what we just talked about, comparing Los Angeles to a place like Iditarod.
Yeah, and even if Iditarod somehow were able to have Wi-Fi that's as good as the Wi-Fi is in Anchorage, the Wi-Fi in Anchorage is, it's. I'm about to sound like I'm complaining, which I'm not. But the Wi-Fi in Anchorage is fine for 90% of the things you want to do, but it's really not particularly good compared to the Wi-Fi and internet speeds that are available in a lot of other cities in the country.
Right. So very quickly, the next story I have is about a sled dog team coming in contact with a couple of bison and a calf on the trail from, I believe it's from Rhone to Nikolai, and it is with Musher Marcel Frieseno. It's her third Iditarod, and this happens to be her first encounter with a couple of bison out on the trail. And it says in the story on ADN that her lead dogs got real curious about these huge animals on the trail that would not move, and pretty much right after that, they got spooked pretty quickly. They all got into a huge tangle, and Marcel jumped off her sled and ran after those bison with an axe, yelling at them to get out of the way, get out of the way. So I guess this has a very interesting story behind it. First off, we've talked a lot on the show about that mandatory gear that you have to have in your sled, and that axe is one of them. And the second part of the story is, it's just really interesting that in today's day and age that you're going to come in contact in the middle of nowhere with some buffalo or bison. Most people think that with the exception of sort of commercial bison, for feedlots and the like, there's not a whole lot of bison floating around anymore, are there?
No, and I think Alaska is probably one of the few places left where you have herds of bison that are really, really free, and not just free on a certain small acreage, but really can roam very, very freely.
Right, and this area is in the area of the Farewell Burn, which burned many decades ago, a huge forest fire, and way back in 1965, so almost 45 years ago or so, the Department of Fish and Game transplanted a herd of bison in this area, and they have pretty much thrived here on this kind of nasty part of the Iditarod Trail that's just full of scrub brush and nasty types of fauna out there, or flora, I guess it would be, that they can munch on and take care of themselves. I don't know. I've come in contact with a moose or two in my day on a dog team, but they're usually pretty flighty. They'll get out of the way relatively quickly, but I can only imagine standing face to face with a dog team, and I believe she had all 16 dogs at that point, face to face with 3 bison on the trail, and not having much way of getting them out of the trail.
Yeah, speaking of dogs, there was a story I saw a day or two ago that Mitch Seavey actually dropped his lead dog, who I believe is a former Golden Harness winner, and there was some speculation about whether this meant that Mitch was going to be in trouble or that Mitch's run wasn't going in the way that he thought it was going to go. But I have to tell you, I think he's got 13 dogs left, and he is definitely doing extremely well and right up at the front where I think everyone expected him to be all through the race.
Just from a little bit of a Musher's perspective there, I think a lot of people unknowingly or don't know much about sort of the way that a team is set up. The way that it is, you always hear about the famous lead dogs, whether it's, Baltar or Togo or Reef or any of those types of dogs from some of the teams in the past. But on most Mushers teams, they have many dogs that can step up in that role and take that role of a leader if one of those dogs becomes sick or injured or has to be dropped for one reason or another. And then on the flip side of that, you have other lead dogs that can literally start in Willow at the restart and run the entire 1,000-mile race in lead and do very well and have no problems at all. So I think it's a story, but it's also sort of a non-story at the same time.
Right. And, we've talked a lot about, I think people tend to think of the way the dogs are, the order the dogs are, and who the lead dogs are as being something that's static for 1,000 miles. And from what I've seen and what I've heard, especially on these longer races, mushers will try out other dogs in lead. We'll see how dogs do in lead, and we'll give dogs a chance to show that they are good up and coming leaders. So it's definitely not the case that there's one or even two dogs that for most teams that are in lead for the entire race.
Right, and that's the definition of training, Alex. Here at our kennel with our teams, we're constantly shifting people around. We're putting dogs from lead to swing to team to wheel and back and forth and switching them from A team to B team and all around. And of course, there are dogs that excel in one place or another. There's sort of the go-to leaders or the go-to wheel dogs or vice versa. But, you have to be able to switch them around. It's very similar to other sports where, like in baseball, a person can play first base, but they could also play in the outfield, or they could play shortstop and third base or whatever. And they may be best at one position, but they can easily step into the role and do another position very well.
Yeah.
So who is our Musher profile of the evening?
So our Musher profile of the evening is Bradley Farquhar, who is from Nova Scotia, and he is the first Musher from Nova Scotia to run the Iditarod. He's 31 years old. He said that he first learned about dog mushing when he was 8 years old and watched the movie Iron Will with his grandmother. And he said that being that age and watching these dogs just made an enormous impression upon him. It was a few years later, many years later, that he was out in Alaska, contacted Sebastian Schnulle, who is, of course, an Iditarod musher that many people have followed for the past few years. He has done official commentary on Iditarod.com about the race. This year, I believe he is a race official. He shaved off his iconic beard, but is back out on the Iditarod Trail. And Bradley said that he contacted Sebastian, hung out with him for about a week, got a taste of what it was like to drive a sled dog team, and then he contacted Ken Anderson and sort of went in with Ken Anderson as a handler and learned more and more about dog racing, and then started doing his qualifiers, and this year is running the Iditarod for the first time. Now, there are a group of people who run Iditarod who I guess you could call adventurers or people who like extreme sports. And Bradley Farquhar, I think, definitely qualifies on that team. He is someone who has swum the English Channel in 2013. He summited Denali in 2015, 15, I believe, and now is running the Iditarod for the first time. He, in interviews with his hometown newspapers, he talks a lot about hallucinations, which we've discussed in the past, that when you're on a very long race and you're exhausted and probably hungry and not getting enough sleep and not getting enough to eat, people will routinely start to see and hear things that just are not there. And he's talked a lot about that, and has said that he really just loves the experience of being out in the wilderness and really pushing himself and challenging himself. He, when he got through the Dalzell Gorge, when he got to McGrath, he gave an interview to KTUU, and he was saying that his lead dog had sort of hesitated going into the gorge, and then another dog of his named Jimmy sort of stepped up, and he went through, and he said that it was absolutely terrifying and horrible, and yet when he got back to the checkpoint, he thought, yeah, I want to go back and do that again, which I think is the sign of someone who's a real musher, is they go through this incredible experience that is horrifying and in certain ways death-defying, and come out of it just amazed and wanting to go back and do it again almost immediately. He is someone who is really at home with challenges. You certainly have to do that to be able to run desert marathons, Arctic marathons, cross the English Channel, and his website, if people want to check him out and learn a little bit more about him, is called lifealwaysworksout.com. So I think that tells you a lot about this man's strategy towards life and the way he's approaching not only being a musher and running the Iditarod, but also generally how he looks on all of these challenges. He is currently in 45th place, I believe, and is right now in just left to Katna a little while ago. So he is on his way out to Ophir. He's taken his 24-hour mandatory rest. So he is very, very solidly in the middle of the pack, maybe the front of the middle of the pack, which is a great position for a rookie this far into the race.
And you know, Alex, I'm sitting here looking at Brad's website right now, and as you mentioned, lifealwaysworksout.com. What a cool domain name for your website. And what I find really interesting about this is on his website, it's broken down into tiles, and the first big tile at the top is, it says it's his story, and it's his picture of him and his dogs, and it says racing in the Iditarod, and then on down there is a tile for a marathon, then as you mentioned the English Channel, and then climbing Denali is another big tile, and then there's one that says that talks about his marathon in the desert, and right next to that is a huge white space where the next tile will go, and I'm just interested to see what will be that tile for Bradley on his next adventure. He's done a lot of cool things in his life, but he's left a very open spot for his next huge adventure. I think that might be Everest. What do you think?
Yeah, I was actually thinking Everest as well. He said in an interview right before the race that when he gets that he's sad that his time in Alaska is going to be coming to an end soon, and he really would like to be on Amazing Race Canada and find himself a wife. So
well,
those certainly are adventures as well.
That could be the next tile on that website. But guys, definitely check out Bradley's website. Life is Always an Adventure, I believe is what it is, right, Alex? .com. We'll
Life Always Works Out.
Life Always Works Out. I apologize. I already closed it. So, guys, we are just about out of time First off, I got to give kudos and thanks to my buddy Alex last night. He really stepped up and hosted this show on his own. I was stuck in class at UAA until 10 o'clock, and I know you had some other things leading up to it, but you really stepped up and did it on your own. It's tough to host a podcast when you're just standing there looking at a microphone and trying to get a show out in 30 minutes that tells this sort of the story of the day. Isn't it, Alex? It's much different than editing a story up and putting it together in pieces.
It really is, and I think I said this to you, and I said this at the end of the show last night as well. It is so much easier doing this when it's the two of us. You know, when I sort of run out of steam, you're always there to jump in, and when you're talking, I can be checking something online at the same time. So, you know, it really, I think, is a great combination when it's the two of us. And it's certainly possible to do by yourself, but it's a lot harder.
Right, it is for sure. All right, guys. Well, again, thanks for listening. If you have comments or questions, make sure you shoot us over a Facebook or Twitter message. And I do want to thank everybody that's commented this far, telling us how good a job we're doing. That really keeps us going. As we mentioned at the top, you know, we're doing what we can to host this every night. And you know, Alex is on the side of the road somewhere, and you know, a couple of days ago, I was in my truck in a parking lot with my dog team, and so on and so forth. So it's always cool to be able to connect with everyone and go from there. So, Alex, can you hold by just for a second as we close, and then we'll make sure to wrap this up right here. So on behalf of my co-host, Alex Stein, this is Robert Forto. We will talk to you guys tomorrow here on our daily coverage of the 2018 Iditarod on Mushing Radio. Goodbye.
Did you know that Alaska Dog Works trains service dogs for those in need throughout North America? Each and every service dog that is trained through the Lead Dog Service Dog Program and Michelle Forto and her team has an individual training plan. We train for autistic, mobility, psychiatric, and PTSD for our soldiers for service work. If you know of someone that may need a service dog, please take a moment and check out Alaska Dog Works on social media and at alaskadogworks.com.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things you can do. You can take a couple of minutes and go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all of our DogWorks Radio sponsors and promotions in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook, like our Facebook page, and one last thing, please tell all of your friends by spreading the word about DogWorks Radio. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
DogWorks Radio is produced by Robert Forto. Logo art by Angry Squirrel Studios. DogWorks Radio is produced in conjunction with KVRF 89.7 in Palmer, Alaska.
For dog training advice, you can contact Alaska Dog Works at 907-841-1686 or visit their website at alaskadogworks.com. If you have a show idea or would like to be a guest, please contact us by sending an email to live@dogworksradio.com.